Okay, good morning, class. Today I'm going to give you your speed tests only. We'll start with your 140 lit. Proper names you have, well defined, and it's hyphenated, and that's it. Okay? Here we go, you all. 140 lit number 1 for 5 minutes. The business plan is primarily for both. Now you must reduce it to writing and create the game plan to describe your new business and how you expect to implement it. While the specific outline of your business plan can vary, all plans should contain certain common sections. A title page and table of contents are vital to reference major topics in the plan to make it user-friendly and to indicate the completeness of the plan. The final summary shown in the front of the plan, but not finished until the end, summarizes the most important parts of the plan and invites the reader to fully consider it. This summary briefly describes the business in plain terms for the reader to grasp. It must have the mission and the goals of the business, describe the products or services offered, and clearly state the financial aid needed. You must clearly explain your equity investment, how any debt or liens will be repaid, and just why you think your business will be successful. All of this should be contained in 1 or 2 pages at the most. After the final summary, the body of the plan must describe the business. This includes a description of the industry, a more detailed rating of your products and services, and a brief section on how you will market your product or service. In describing the business and industry, you must include all competitive issues facing your business. Also include the physical plant required and any large equipment required. Finally, in describing the industry, you should list all the risk factors aligned with your plan and say why you think you'll be successful. The plan must also include your organizational plan, naming the legal structure and the management team, accountants, lawyers, and insurance groups. Of course, it must include those who will run the business. The marketing plan is a most important part of the business plan. Your target markets and target niche must be well defined, and your specific marketing methods and selling methods should be described. The marketing plan should explain any unique product design or service to be offered, as well as your pricing and sales promotion plans. You must also describe your competition, their strengths and weaknesses, and what you must do to compete. What are your own strengths and weaknesses? If needed, include the market leader's share of the market and describe how entrenched they are. A clear grasp of the competitive market is vital for any successful venture. Next is the financial plan. What are your total fiscal needs? How much will be your own equity investment and how much will come from investors or lenders? Describe the fiscal premise and bases upon which your plan is built. List all your fiscal needs, including startup costs, working capital requirements, and an amount to offset the negative cash flow after startup. Fully list the sources and uses of all funds. List all of your funding sources, both debt and equity. The fiscal plan should include all financial documents such as a balance sheet, income statement, and a 3-year cash flow sheet. If the business exists now, a business fiscal history should be included. Once again, the summary of financial needs should spell out what is being asked, and most importantly, the cash flow sheet should explain how you expect to pay it back. All of the above information must be summarized and placed at the beginning of the plan to entice the reader to read on. In the appendix of the business plan, all supporting documents should be listed in detail. This will mean the owner's own resume, the owner's financial statements, credit reports, and 3 years of prior income tax statements. other stats such as copies of leases, mortgages, purchase agreements, contracts, letters of reference, and other general and legal data should be included. The business plan, well prepared, will teach you, the new owner, all there is to know about your business. It is this confidence coupled with an in-depth cash management plan and marketing plan that provides you with the same game plan for your business. Added to last month's article, you should, and then we have your 140 number 2, you have Jamie, Miss Edna, Jim, Mildred, the Lone Ranger, Marion, and Jurgens. And this is going to be 140 lit number 2 for 5 minutes. And it is a story, okay? It's called Mama's Plan. I suppose it was the reality of my first grandchild, Jamie, starting school that triggered the bittersweet memories of my first year of school. The year was 1942. Miss Edna was that marvelous, old-fashioned kind of teacher who gladly put her entire life into teaching. I loved school, the smell of chalk and colored crayons, the way the old wooden floors smelled after Jim, the janitor, had waxed them, and having my own desk that was just my size. There was, however, one overwhelming problem with school: Mildred. Daily, when I walked the short distance home after school, Mildred would taunt me, hit me, and scare me. I was absolutely terrified of her. She had failed first grade and was a year older than I. Mildred didn't have any friends, so she seemed to concentrate on making enemies. Because I was one of the smallest children in first grade, she had selected me as her number one enemy. As we walked home after school, she would continually step on the back of the heels of my shoes and cause the shoes to slide down. Then, when I stopped to adjust them, Mildred would slap me hard on the back. As soon as the dismissal bell rang each day, my heart started to pound and I blinked fast so I wouldn't cry. Pretty soon, my mother figured out something was wrong at school. I didn't want to tell her about Mildred. I sat close to the radio listening to the Lone Ranger, pretending not to hear her questions about school. Mother continued to question me, and finally I sobbed out the whole story. "You can't do anything, Mama. You can't. Everyone will think I'm a baby." It was impossible for Mother to pick me up after school. She had to work. My father had died a few years earlier. I didn't have any sisters or brothers to watch after me. I couldn't imagine what my mother might do. I was certain there was no answer at all for a problem this big. The next day at school, Miss Edna leaned over my desk and whispered, "Marion, dear, could you stay after school and help me with a project? I spoke with your mother last evening and she said it would be fine with her." Her blue eyes were understanding and she smelled like Jergens hand lotion. I decided right then that all angels must have blue eyes and smell like Jergens hand lotion. I nodded eagerly. I remained joyfully at my desk when the dismissal bell rang. Mildred looked confused for a bit, but filed out with the others. After a while, Miss Edna said that I'd better be going on home. She stood on the front step of the school and waved to me. I skipped up the hill without any fear whatsoever. Then, just as I got to the top of the hill, I heard familiar footsteps behind me. Mildred had waited for me. She immediately stepped on the back of my shoe and slapped my back. I cried. I couldn't help it. When my mother saw my face after she got home from work, she questioned me. I begged not to go to school and didn't sleep much that night. The next morning she said, Marian, I'm going to walk up the hill with you today. I believe we'll see Mildred. Mildred walked from way across town to school. She never bothered me on the way to school, only afterward. Oh, Mama, please don't do that. Don't say anything to Mildred. It will just make her mad. Let me stay home by myself. Please, Mama. Hurry and get dressed, Marian. Her voice was gentle but quite firm. Please, Mama. Trust me, Marian. I have a plan. My insides were in turmoil. Why couldn't my mother understand that no plan she had dreamed up was going to work? We bundled up against the bitter cold and started walking up the hill. Maybe we wouldn't see Mildred, I hoped, but my mother had this confident look. I knew the look well, and I had a sinking feeling that we would see Mildred and then we'll get ready for your 120s. So we have your 120 number 1. You have Mark dumbstruck, ECINA, J, and then Janice. Okay, and this is going to be 120 number 1 for 5 minutes. Okay, literary. On my first day of teaching, all my classes were going well. Being a teacher, I was going to be a cinch, I decided. Then came period 7, the last day of class. As I walked toward the room, I heard furniture crash. Rounding the corner, I saw one boy pinning another to the floor. Listen, you retard, yelled the one on the bottom. I don't give a damn about your sister. You keep your hands off her, you hear me? The boy on top threatened. I drew up my short frame and asked them to stop fighting. Suddenly, 14 pairs of eyes were riveted on my face. I knew I did not look convincing. Glaring at each other and me, the 2 boys slowly took their seats. At that moment, the teacher from across the hall stuck his head in the door and shouted at my students to sit down, shut up, and do what I said. I was left feeling powerless. I tried to teach the lesson I had prepared, but was met with a sea of guarded faces. As the class was leaving, I detained the boy who had instigated the fight. I'll call him Mark. Lady, don't waste your time, he told me. We're the retards. Then Mark strolled out of the room. Dumbstruck, I slumped into my chair and wondered if I should have become a teacher. Was the only cure for problems like this to get out? I told myself I'd suffer for 1 year, and after my marriage that next summer, I'd do something more rewarding. They got to you, didn't they? It was my college colleague who had come into my classroom earlier. I nodded. Don't worry, he said. I taught many of them in summer school. There are only 14 of them, and most won't graduate anyway. Don't waste your time with those kids. What do you mean? They live in shacks in the fields. They're migratory labor pickers kids. They come to school only when they feel like it. The boy on the floor had pestered Mark's sister while they were picking beans together. I had to tell them to shut up at lunch today. Just keep them busy and quiet. If they cause any trouble, send them to me. As I gathered my things to go home, I couldn't forget the look on Mark's face as he said, We're the retards. Retards? That word clattered in my brain. I knew I had to do something drastic. The next afternoon, I asked my colleague not to come into my class again. I needed to handle the kids in my own way. I returned to my room and made eye contact with each student. Then I went to the board and wrote ECINAJ. That's my first name, I said. Can you tell me what it is? They told me my name was weird and that they had never seen it before. I went to the board again and this time wrote Janice. Several of them blurted the word, then gave me a funny look. You're right, my name is Janice. I said, I'm learning impaired, something called dyslexia. When I began school, I couldn't write my own name correctly. I couldn't spell words and numbers swam in my head. I was labeled retarded. That's right, I was a retard. I can still hear those awful voices and feel the shame. So how'd you become a teacher? Someone asked. Because I hate labels and I'm not stupid and I love to learn. That's what this class is going. And then we have your number 2, 120 lit, Winnie the Pooh, The Little Lame Princess, Christopher Robin's, Cheaper by the Dozen, Love Story, The Bridges of Madison County, East of Eden, Steinbeck, New York City, and Mississippi. And this is going to be 120 lit number 2 for 5 minutes. Books have been such an influential part of my life. I actually wonder what it would have been like without them. When I was little, my mom read Winnie the Pooh to my sister and me. Before I started school, I began reading on my own. I read everything. I read books that were totally inappropriate and books that were perfect for a child. I still have a ragged and much used copy of The Little Lame Prince. I remember the book made a tremendous impression and I read it many, many times. My family accuses me constantly of always defending the underdog, poor, helpless, whatever. Perhaps The Little Prince is where it began. The characters in the Winnie the Pooh book were so real to me that I knew the color of Christopher Robin's hair and even saw the way the sun glinted on it on sunny, blustery days. I noticed the similarities between the characters and family members. The book was just part of my life. My parents had a book called Cheaper by the Dozen, which I read so many times, my mother finally took it from me. But as I became a teenager, I only wanted to read about love. Any love story would do as long as it was a love story. I cried, laughed, hated, and loved along with the women in the books I read. Even later, I began to devour books like Love Story. I was always a sap for a sad story. I guess that's why, even though I think the literary content of The Bridges of Madison County was not wonderful, I still loved the story and cried at the end. I believe the first novel, really good novel, I read was East of Eden by Steinbeck. I reread it every 4 or 5 years, and the characters change with each reading. Of course, my perception is changing, I'm sure. It's such a well-written book and tells such a long, involved tale that it's just irresistible. When my daughter was 23, she read it and felt the same way. 2 or 3 years later, she read it again and said she didn't see what she enjoyed so much about it. And I'm sure if she reads it again in a few years, she'll have a different opinion. I think reading is something that just cannot be replaced by electronic media. When we read, the characters then become our own. The idea of creating a sort of reality and of reality being different for each person reading a book becomes crystal clear. Obviously, a wealthy socialite in New York City will not envision the characters the same as a poor domestic worker in Mississippi. My children have always loved books. They began reading at a very young age and continue to now. My son writes as well as reads, and in his work I see the influence of the life he led and the environment he grew up in that was filled with books. My daughter also reads. A large portion of her income goes to bookstores. There is simply no greater pleasure than beginning a book, finding it superbly absorbing and entertaining, and stretching the reading of it out for at least 2 or 3 days. It's like having a delightful secret, knowing that you have that book waiting for you. As I approach old age, only about 20 years away, one of the things that keeps me from dreading being older is thinking of all the books I'll be able to read. I look forward to quiet evenings. Okay, you all, that concludes your tests, you all. So they were a little hard. They were hard, so I don't know if you'll type them up, but have a great day, you all.